This week on Blue Collar Woodworking. About a month ago, we ripped the dust collection system out of our shop with the idea that we were going to make some upgrades. Actually, that was like a month ago. And ever since, we've been inhaling giant clouds of dust, and it's starting to have an effect on us. This is an actual x-ray of my lungs. No kidding, that's the inside of Stumpy Nubs, and it ain't pretty. I look like a 70-year-old coal miner. Of course, it's not all that bad. I mean, Randy's getting used to holding his breath, which means he talks less. That's great for everybody. And I don't have to buy any pellets for the wood stove. We just have to pick our noses. But chewing after every breath, that's starting to get to be a little much. It's time to get back to work on that dust collection system.
Dust collection systems can take many forms, some more effective than others. A shop vac can do a fair job in some situations, but it struggles with larger machines like joiners and planers. Single stage units like the popular Harbor Freight collector are a big improvement. But even the more expensive versions are more accurately called chip collectors than dust collectors.
All that sawdust that your collector picks up, that's great for making the shop look better, but it's only cosmetic. These wood shavings aren't going to get in your lungs. It's the fine dust that comes out of those shavings. And there's no single stage collector on the market that will get all of that fine dust. You still have to wear a dust mask. So what's the point of installing a few $100s worth of ducts and equipment just to save yourself having to use a broom? I want something that will keep my air sparkling clean and my lungs cancer-free. So I'm going to get a hold of the father of dust collection himself, Bill Pentz. He's the guy who dedicated his life and considerable expertise to the study of woodshop dust collection. So while I chat with him, you can check out the next segment. Woodworkers like me don't get smart on our own. We get smart by watching people smarter than us. For example, Charles Neal did a special on making a lowboy as part of his Mastering Woodworking series. When it came time to cut the mortises, he showed us how to do it with a router instead of a big fancy mortising machine. Now, a lot of guys are impatient like me and they want to just jam it in and cut it all in one pass. Well, here's Charles' take on it.
If you don't have a mortiser, that's fine. All you got to do is drill it and chisel it. You know, I've done them before I got a mortiser. I mean, I've done many of them that way. You could also set you up a guide with a 3/8 plunge bit. I see guys do that. Let me give you a word of advice. If you set this up and you use a router with a plunge bit, don't try to do it by plunging and cutting. You're going to find if you do that, it's going to try to pull off of this side. And your mortise is going to get out of line. It just does. Here's how you do it. Drill it. Take that mortar, plunge it, come up, move, plunge, come up, move, punch it out. Then you can cut it. But in either case, be careful that it doesn't move on this side.
Thanks, Charles. And you can thank Charles Neal by visiting cnwoodworking.com and see for yourself how people smarter than me do it. The other day I watched this video. It's got to be one of the coolest things I've ever seen. These guys at the University of Japan came up with a way to test the effect of a chip breaker on a piece of wood using a milling machine and a high-resolution microscope. Now, you combine all that and you are in for some fun. They filmed a close-up of the shaving curling off the blade under various conditions. Here's what they found out.
If your blade is very sharp and you cut with a grain, you can get a great finish without a chip breaker, as long as you don't go too deep. You can even get a fairly good result against the grain, but it requires an extremely sharp blade and a microscopically thin shaving. If you add a standard chip breaker, it will greatly improve your against the grain cut, no surprise there. But the quality of that cut improves the closer you set the edge of the chip breaker to the blade. 1/10 of a millimeter was the optimal setting, which is very hard to do by eye. Here's where it gets interesting. If you grind your chip breaker's leading edge to a steeper angle of 80 degrees, the opposite becomes true. Now the cut improves the farther you back it away from the edge of the blade. A little less than 1/2 a millimeter becomes the optimal setting, which is a lot easier to judge by eye, and your against the grain cuts are very smooth with even a thicker shaving.
Now, I'm not saying you should start grinding your chip breakers or that you should toss all the antique planes that don't have them, but it was an interesting video. And if you want to watch it for yourself, I'll put a link at stumpynubs.com.
Want to impress your friends? Then just go to stumpynubs.com and click on the tab that says Stumpy Store. There you'll find plans for many of the projects you see on Blue Collar Woodworking, and you can help support the show.
So while you guys were lollygagging, I was doing something useful talking to Bill Pentz. Actually, I've been corresponding with him for a few months. Just sounds better to say I did it while you were watching that segment. Anyway, his take is a little controversial, at least to some people, because he says that there really isn't a dust collection system on the market that will handle the fine dust to an appropriate degree, even the expensive cyclones. He bases that on years of study and in-depth testing on everything from air quality to static pressure to all sorts of stuff I don't even try to understand. The bottom line is he's come up with his own design that he says works, and you can build it yourself. So that's what I'm going to do. I don't know if you know this, but I like to make everything I can out of wood. Sure, a big cyclone may be easier to make out of something else, like, I don't know, sheet metal or something, but I find that a lot of woodworkers are just in their comfort zone with wood and they don't want to leave it. So the challenge is to make a cyclone design, mostly out of wood, that's easy and inexpensive to build. And we're going to do it based on the carefully researched designs of Bill Pentz. So the first step is to make that big cylinder that goes above the cone. I was going to use some bendable plywood, but that can be kind of hard to find and a little bit pricey. Then it hit me. Why not just make a giant segmented barrel without the bottom? Brilliant!
Segmented objects are a favorite of woodturners because you can make a bowl or other vessel without the waste that comes from hollowing out the center. The same principle can be applied to all sorts of projects that require a thick, bent surface. The process is simple. Decide how many segments you want, remembering that the more you have, the smoother the curve will be. Since a full circle is 360 degrees, you can calculate the proper angle to set your blade by dividing 360 into the number of segments and then splitting that number in half. Once you rip all of your segments, the challenge becomes glue up. Stumpy's favorite method is to tape all of the outer seams. This will hold everything in place as you flip it over and apply the glue. Then you can just roll it up and use some rubber bands or ratchet straps to tighten it all together. An added benefit of the tape is that it prevents glue squeeze out.
The result is one big old barrel. Now the size that we made was 18 inches in diameter, and I didn't just pull that out of the air. I mean, we're not just making this stuff up as we go along. No, that was based on the testing that Bill Pentz conducted. He found that a cyclone must be properly sized to fit your motor and impeller if it's going to work efficiently. He also found that the length and angle of the cone that goes under this sucker is important too. For this system, we're going to use an 11.5 degree cone. So this project is going to require a few angles to be cut, and that's why I'm glad I have this little doodad in the next segment. Long ago in a galaxy far, far away, old-timers had to use angle gauges to set their table saw blades. No more. I saw this little sucker at my local woodworking store, and at $30, I thought it was a luxury. And boy, was I right. This sucker is amazing. It's a digital angle gauge made by Wixey. They make all kinds of digital gauges, but I like this one in particular because you can set it right on your blade with magnets, and it will tell you exactly the angle that you're setting at as you crank the blade. It's amazing. The other thing I like about it is that it is precisely 90 degrees. They don't advertise that, but I checked it with a machinist square. It is 90 degrees. So it can also be used to check that your blade is 90 degrees to begin with. Then you can zero it out, stick it on, and crank it to whatever angle you want. And you get repeatable angles. That's the best part. But it doesn't stop here. I took this all over the workshop, and I used it for other things, like setting my joiner fence. I used it on the bandsaw. You know, I made the blade 90 degrees to the table, and then I used this to judge the angle I was tilting my table at, and that's how I got the proper angle to cut the rings to make this cone. So, it's a little expensive. Maybe it's not for everyone, but if there's one luxury you're going to get for your shop, this is one of my favorite things.
Find everybody's favorite fat little woodworker on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and read his hilarious weekly woodworking blog at stumpynubs.com.
My first plan for making the cone also included bending some type of sheet good. The problem is that any material that's thin enough to bend is probably not going to be strong enough for the cone, especially when you get down to the bottom, which is about 8 inches. In fact, I didn't find any wood product that could do that. And I didn't want to do another segmented structure like I did for the barrel on the top, because not only is it round, it's also tapered, and that's a lot of complex cutting. The solution, well, it's a stack of plywood rings. More brilliance.
Since the cone is 30 inches tall, you might think it would require several sheets of plywood to cut all those rings. But cutting each ring out at a consistent angle allows the use of the center of each ring to be used to make another one further down the cone. The whole thing was made from a single sheet of 3/4 inch plywood.
You could use a circle cutting jig, but I just tilted my bandsaw table and did it all by eye. And I also stuck about 4 or 5 layers of plywood together with glue because there's a lot of rings on this, and I haven't got all day. The result is this giant cone, which is quite beautiful, if I do say so myself. Now, next week, we're going to work on a liner for this cone because, let's face it, it's awful hard to get it smooth by cutting it on a bandsaw. And being smooth inside is critical. Then we're going to mount it all in a frame. We're going to start talking about blowers, and then we'll start thinking about ductwork, machine hookups, even an overhead air filter for anything that our filters on the dust collection cyclone doesn't get. And of course, eventually, after our 3-episode series, all this is going to be worked out in some plans that you can take advantage of too. So stay tuned. Well, it's been another long day at the Stumpy Nubs workshop. Time to close up and relax. The other day I was eating a bag of Cheetos when it struck me. I'm not as good looking as some of the other guys out there. Now, I hold my own, don't get me wrong. I've had no problem getting a date for the last 16 years, mostly because Mrs. Stumpy feels obligated to go to McDonald's with her husband. But when I look into the mirror, I see something very different from what I assume guys like Tommy McDonald see. My abs are a little less defined. My pecs are more of the man boob variety. I can give out tickets to the gun show just like the rest of them, but people stopped paying attention a long time ago to me. You'd think that would bother me. I mean, a big-time internet TV star like myself should surely worry about how fans see him. Well, you'd be wrong. I find that fans of the show are more interested in what I say than what I do, and what I do than what I look like. And that takes a lot of pressure off me. All I have to do is be myself. My ideas for new jigs and workshop improvements and the tips I pass along and the tricks that I'm always learning the hard way, that's all I have to worry about. And the other things will take care of themselves. I don't have to eat salads. I don't even have to wear deodorant. Nobody cares, because with a name like Stumpy Nubs, people aren't expecting to see Fabio around here, let me tell you. So, all you ugly woodworkers out there, keep your chin up. I may not be one of you, but I'm no Tommy Mack or Christopher Schwartz or Roy Underhill. I'm just Stumpy Nubs, a halfway good-looking, slightly overweight, disheveled woodworking genius who invites you each week to sit back and have a cold one. Because you've earned it, my friend. I've been filming this entire thing with my pants unzipped.